From a secure location in southwest Scotland, a man has emerged. His aim is to leave you in a sense of awe, entertain you and enthrall you with the artwork that he presents. Many know him by many different names, but we simply know him as the artist. In tonight's show, the artist will teach you how to paint a Halloween painting from start to finish. But not only that, he will show you how to change your composition should a new idea come along the way. The artist takes a 2-inch brush. He covers a top layer of blue paint. All he's done here is to add phthalo blue and a tiny amount of white. He covers a quarter of the canvas. He then comes in with a little more phthalo blue and he begins working the second quarter of the canvas, just side to side. Nothing too strenuous so far. The artist is saying hello. He then comes in to fill the remainder of the canvas with phthalo blue and Mars black. The artist is working in different layers here, which is key for paintings. He's putting in a base layer, as you can see, and now beginning to blend all those colours up together. He wants us to pause. We switch now to the 1.5-inch brush. The artist taps in with a little bit of Mars black and titanium white. With the corner of the brush, he begins making circular motions. We've got some pretty little clouds here. Each cloud is its own formation, so he works some small clouds in. He then comes in with a little bit more black to make a differentiation. He now shows us, ooh, it's like he's producing white paint from his finger. The artist creates a haze, blends it on out, adds a little bit more titanium white, and then adds a basic shape of the moon. Using your finger to do this helps create a beautiful circular shape. He then comes back in with a 1.5-inch brush. Black paint and a little bit of water to help the paint spread really well. Now he's beginning putting in the basic shapes of his mountains. We don't want to see any Toblerones or pyramids here. Beautiful rocky mountains is what the artist is going for. He then blends the colour on out using the paint that's already on the canvas and the remaining paint that's left on the brush. We pause. The artist wants us to come in for a closer look. He then takes a small roundhead brush, loads it with white paint and begins pulling from the right side to the right corner. He's now laying in a base colour of snow. He then comes back in with a little bit of phthalo blue, titanium white and a small amount of black and begins doing the same technique, only the opposite way. The artist then comes in with a 1/4-inch brush filled with white paint and pressing really hard on the canvas begins adding mist. This is a technique that can take students quite a while to pick up, so if you don't pick it up straight away, don't panic. It's a similar way to painting the clouds. The artist wants us to come in. Oh, we're going for a shoulder eye view. With a fan brush loaded with black paint, he then begins to add the illusion of distant evergreen trees. All he's doing here is tapping upwards and downwards on the side of the brush to create this effect. He then takes the brush and at the base of the trees begins skimming in some landmass. Very cool to say the least. He then repeats this same technique on the left side, working from the middle of the canvas to the far left corner. I'm loving the gloves. The artist then begins using what paint is left on his brush and what paint is underneath the trees to put in landmass. I think our artist likes things being symmetrical. Maybe it's OCD, or CDO, depending how you look at it. Anyway, he then colours in the canvas in black. He's now laying a base colour. He does so on the other side as well, just to create the basic shapes and the illusion of landmass. He fills out the bottom half of the canvas as he wants to. The artist asks us to pause. Oh, that's taking too long. The artist picks up a 2-inch brush, fills it with black paint. Yes, artist, we can see it's a 2-inch brush. Fills it with black paint and begins colouring the canvas as desired to lay in this base colour. I'm excited to see what the artist does. Oh, a clap of the hands. And we have the next stage ready and prepared. The artist tells us then to change to the 1.5 inch brush. He loads it with sap green and neon yellow. The artist has got some sort of a plan in mind. Bear in mind this is something to do with Halloween, so it'll be kind of cool to see what the artist puts together. The artist has loaded the brush full of paint to create a really sharp point on his 1.25 inch brush. Using a tapping motion, he's laying in a base colour of grass. Can you see how important laying those base colours and foundations are? You'll see more of those later on in the show. He then repeats the second stage on the right hand side of the canvas with the same technique. From this angle we can see quite clearly how the artist is putting this together. Interesting face paint this week. The artist continues to use this technique all the way down to the bottom of the canvas as he sees fit, and he feels in his heart that it should be. I wonder what kind of maybe a spooky painting it'll be, or if it'll be one of his beautiful landscapes. It's always hard to tell. I know the artist likes to repurpose canvas. Oh, sorry artist. The artist is now pointing to the canvas. He's got something in mind. He takes a filbert brush, loaded with black paint on one side and white paint on the other. Oh, the artist seems to be changing his mind. I feel we must draw your attention to at this stage about the artist is he is a composer, meaning he has no preconceived ideas, no photos to work from. Everything you see in the shows comes straight from his heart and his hands as you see them. The artist now begins to lay in a base colour of what looks to be a house. He's doing this in black paint. The artist puts the basis down, and because he's using white paint as well, it means that he can put in some shadow colour. The moon is behind the house, so it's important to remember that the darkest areas, in theory, will be at the front of the house where the artist is currently working. The artist then begins to block in the colour and lay in his base colour. Once this has dried, the artist can then add in more detail and tone to the house. Remembering to pull in the directions that a house would actually be formed in, the artist asks us to come in for a closer look. He comes in now with that same filbert brush, loaded with black paint, and he's putting in more of the base colours. For those of you that haven't painted with us before, we're allowing you to see in its entirety this video so you can get to grips with how colours need to be laid in and how to layer a colour. The artist then comes back in with a two-tone technique, which is white on one side of the brush and black on the other. He then begins putting in the base colours for what looks to be a tree. Now he's working the tree roots, and as you can see here, the reflection of the moon is actually hitting the side of the tree. He adds in a little base colour. Perhaps there's going to be lights in this house. A little bit of magic by the looks of it. Ooh, not really. If he wasn't such a good artist, we could swear he was an illusionist. He then comes in with a liner brush. It's loaded with water and then rolled in black paint. The reason for this is because the artist wants the paint to spread like olden day ink. For those of you that are old enough to remember, you remember the fear of knocking over the ink pot. That's kind of the effect that the artist is going for here. With this technique, he is able to paint tree branches in and lay the basis of the tree, which makes it a lot simpler for him and for his students when they come to put foliage on top. That's a pretty cool effect, to say the least. The artist then switches to a 1/4 inch brush. He loads it with black paint, and using the side and the corner of the brush, he begins placing in the foliage. Watch how his hand is working in a clockwise motion. This is key for laying in correct foliage. The artists, especially those that are just beginning, forget to think about shape and form of their trees, and it ends up being a shape that really doesn't resemble a tree. The artist here is showing you the correct techniques of pounding the brush into the canvas while also working in a circular motion. It's pretty impressive given the fact that he's doing this also wearing gloves. The artist has now laid in the base colour, and we can see from this angle on how the tree is actually looking now. The paint will be left to dry and then a colour will be painted on top. to give the tree its correct effect. The artist now comes in with some neon yellow and also sap green. Now normally this side of the house wouldn't be as bright, but bear in mind this is a Halloween painting. There could be all sorts of things that the artist is going to do. Only he knows at this stage how the artwork is going to look. He comes back in with a filbert brush filled with Van Dyke brown, yellow ochre and titanium white, and begins a downward horizontal stroking motion. In doing so, he's laying a base colour for where the mountains and the moonlight actually reflect the colour onto the house. This enables us to see the colours a little bit clearer. He brings the canvas a little bit closer so as we can see what he's up to. He adds a little bit more yellow ochre in, and this effect creates the house outlay. The house outlay is a simple outline of where the house and proportions would be. Using the horizontal strokes, he now begins to create the base of the house. Adding highlight to each side of the house enables us and him to be able to see where everything is. The artist then comes in with what looks to be a liner brush. He's laying small circles, I'm not quite certain why, but of black paint. I'm sure it'll all make sense as it goes along. The artist continues to come in and lay base colours into his painting. I wonder what they could be. Anyway, I'm sure we'll find out as time goes on. The artist with black paint just touches up the tree roots underneath. This gives the painting a more 3D effect. Oh, now remember how I told you earlier on that the artist was going to paint a picture and then change it? Well, he's actually done that. As you can see, the house is no longer there, and he's now painting over the mountains. He's obviously seen and felt something that we haven't. As I said earlier on, the artist is a composer. He's composing this all out of his own mind and heart as he goes along. The artist then steps up to his painting with a 1/4 inch brush loaded with white paint. He's now creating some real deep mist. This is what is known as a breaker colour. While I've got a second, I'd like to explain what a breaker colour is. We have mountains in the background. If the artist continues with his previous trail of thought, he will also paint trees in. However, if he was just to paint trees in on top of a black background, they would disappear. So the white paint in the mist is actually used as a breaker colour in order to create that separation so as you can see both. Yes, we were right. The artist then comes in with a 1/4 inch brush loaded with black paint, and this time he's lifting the paint upwards on the canvas, creating a lot of evergreen trees really quickly with this technique. Once again, he worked underneath the canvas to add shadow and shading of the reflection of the moonlight that's hitting the trees. That is quite some atmosphere that he's got going on over there now. The artist begins once again laying in a base colour using a filbert brush. It looks to be the house that we painted earlier on, only from a further away distance perspective. Once again, he paints it in black so as when he comes to paint the colours on top, they really pop out and they stand out for a mile. Our artist has many years of expertise, so he knows pretty much what he's doing inside and out, even if it doesn't look like it at the time. He had shadow underneath where the reflection would be hitting the back of the moon. Once again, he paints in the base of the tree with a filbert brush and two-tone technique. White will be facing the moon and the lightest areas of the tree. He then comes in with black paint and paints in the darkest areas of the tree. He turns the paintbrush over once again to hit the light areas of the tree roots where the moon would be hitting. And now begins developing a path. In the Old West, a lot of paintings that exist had a zigzag path. It's not historically accurate, but it makes for much more of a pleasing painting. So much so, pleasing on the eye. Again, he touches up the tree roots with the black paint and begins just developing the painting a little bit more. He's working on the shape of the foliage on his tree. A small roundhead brush, he begins adding in the highlight colour into the house. He's working yellow ochre, titanium white and Van Dyke brown into the roof of the house. He then begins laying into the base of the house as well with that same colour. His next step is to pick up the palette knife, roll out a small amount of titanium white, cut off a little roll of it, and then begin adding snow onto the mountains. This is one of the techniques that more mature artists specialise in all the time. It creates an amazing effect of a snow-capped mountain while also showing the beautiful darkness of the rocks coming through, all in one stroke. Working with palette knives can take years of practice to perfect. Our artist certainly has had his share of Bob Ross. He then comes in with titanium white, phthalo blue and Mars black to create a bluey grey. He begins pulling down from the top right hand corner to the left to add the shadow and the shading onto the other side of the mountain. He does this in all three mountains and then cleans his palette knife. And there the artist thinks we can't see him. He's just touching up a few little things, folks, just to add to the mist. It pushes the mountains even further back. He then picks up his mop head brush and also neon yellow. The artist's original idea is to have a glow-in-the-dark painting. We'll see how that works out for him. Traditionally, paintings in a dark setting would not be as bright as this, but because it's a Halloween painting specialising with neon colours, we'll just see what we end up with. As you can see here, using the mop head brush, the artist creates the correct techniques and the correct form of his tree. Beautiful foliage laid on top with certain darker areas and certain brighter areas where the moon would be. The artist is now using a technique that he calls the life force. Basically, the essence behind it is that the closer the grass gets to a subject, such as a tree or a pumpkin or whatever it may be, the brighter it gets. He then picks up orange. And yeah, we were right. He's creating pumpkins. Again, a neon orange. Now that the base colour is all dry, he can add these highlights on quite safely without fear of picking up any black. This is important and a key to his artwork. He then begins adding small pumpkins, what look to be small pumpkins, away in the distance of the house. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that the artist got his inspiration from this week's paint from, I don't know, maybe a party banner or something. Could hang him up on a wall. He then comes in with Mars Black and begins adding the faces on the pumpkins to add realism to his work. The style that the artist is painting in is a thing called surrealism with a hint of fantasy as well. Just in case you wondered. The artist brings the canvas over again for a little bit of a closer look. He's now laying in the basis for the windows. This is where true development starts. He then begins adding a few techniques and tones to the path using the liner brush. From a closer angle we can see what he's up to here. He's beginning to add in more base colours of what we can only assume will be pumpkins. He's got the Halloween theme down to a T. Adding the stalks to the top of the pumpkin again just gives it a final finishing touch on that side of it. He uses the reverse side of the liner brush to scratch in where the tree branches would be. This again is a technique as old as time itself. The artist has stepped away from his easel. He wants us to see what he can see. This is a really important technique that the artist wishes us to emphasize, the importance of stepping back. It's only there that you can see how your artwork really looks. Okay, he's ready to continue. He then begins adding in more. In fact, this time he's adding in rocks. He's using that two-tone technique with white on one side of the brush and black on the other. White wants to be facing upwards. And he's creating semicircles just down the side of the canvas, adding a little more detail onto his house. Again, all the time the artist is evaluating, looking, searching, feeling for where the painting should go next. The artist then begins placing in a base shape of what looks to be rocks. He then picks up a liner brush, picks up some titanium white, and then begins, yes, we got it, he begins adding in the highlights for the rocks. I'm curious to see what this would be. Again, adding more outline to the side of the house, just so as we can see and he can see where everything is. Begins putting in the windows with neon yellow. Aha, he's created a fire pit. This is turning into a house that I would love to visit. Maybe even live. We all need those escapes from time to time. A little bit of titanium white, a little bit of orange. The artist is adding more colour into the fire, working from the hottest part of the fire upwards. It looks to be that the artist... Intriguing. It looks to be that the artist is laying in a light source for where the fire would be reflecting its light. This artist really does think of everything. He then taps things out just to take away the harsh edges. Once again with a filbert brush he comes in with titanium white on one side and black on the other, and begins adding in another tree, this time on the right side. There's no time for drawing branches and painting branches this time, so he's just adding the foliage straight in. It certainly helps when you know how a tree should look. The artist now steps in front of the canvas. He must be getting serious. He's putting back on the gloves. I didn't even realise he'd taken the gloves off. But he's making us aware that he's putting the gloves back on. Maybe there's something in that. The artist turns, does a little bit of production and performance. He then picks up a liner brush. He wants us to come in close yet again, and he begins adding more detail upon the pumpkins. I have to say the artist really does have some very nice glossy hair, just as a random thing. More detail is added to the pumpkins, and then once complete we have a field of pumpkins. This is certainly adding the atmosphere now to this beautiful Halloween painting. The palette that the artist is using is a decorator's palette. He likes a lot of space and he likes a lot of place to work. The added bonus to this is you can pick them up fairly cheaply as well. With all his pumpkins done, the artist now begins adding some work on a sign by the looks of it. Let's see what he's writing. Home. Sweet. Home. This may seem a simple technique, but there is a lot of control that is going on here to write in a space so small. He uses a liner brush loaded with titanium white and water to help the paint spread. He then adds another layer of yellow into the light of the house. One of the things that you will notice a lot about paintings is the amount of layers that a painting is built upon. This is something to remember, especially if you're a beginning artist. He continues with his liner brush, touches into a little bit of water, into some black paint, and continues adding the detail into the pumpkins. Once done, he picks up his mop head brush, touches into the sap green and neon yellow, and then begins adding the final details into the house. This painting is really coming together now. But I don't think we're done with all the surprises just yet. Again, the artist uses the light source technique. The artist then picks up a little bit of titanium white on a liner brush and begins just zigzagging from side to side where the path is being lit. Ooh, the painting has changed now. An interesting thing to note, the artist told us specifically off camera the neon effect did not work, and the reason the neon effect did not work for this is because it was on a dark background. Neon paint works best on a light background, so the artist then picked up a brush and dazzled all of us as he turned it from a cold, very nice painting into all of a sudden an autumn warm painting with a celebration of life occurring. Lots of lights are going on here. As you can see, the painting has been touched up quite a bit since we last saw it. The artist is now adding in lights. He's variating the colours between blue, yellow and red. He continues using his liner brush to create a small area of white around the lights. You'll see this more in detail in a second. This emphasizes the light. See, I wasn't making it up. This draws the eye into the detail. It also adds a base layer and a base line onto the outside of the paint. This tidies things up nicely. As you can see, with light colours on a light background of the mountains, if the base colour wasn't here, the colours would be lost or certainly diminished. The artist begins adding a little bit of a glow onto the back of the tree. It's almost like Christmas. He adds a few final touches into this painting to really help it pop and stand out. We've got a field of pumpkins, we've got mist, we've got autumnal colours. What more could you ask for? He then begins adding a base outline to some little lights that he's got outside the house just to add the final finishing touches to this painting. Again, it just tidies things up nicely, and just like that, he's done it again. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of the artist. The artist will return with more enthralling and inspiring artworks. For further information, head to johnmorrisartfromtheheart.com. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching.